Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB. Joining us to explore criminal justice reform in Louisiana is Bob Mann, a professor at LSU's Manship School of Mass Communication. And welcome to you,
Thank
Bob.
you, Beth. Well, we've heard the statistics. Louisiana's imprisonment rate is the highest in the country. We are the incarceration capital of the world, and while taxpayers spend $700 million per year to house its prisoners, 1/3 of those released end up back behind bars within 3 years.
Well, for the last several years, an unlikely group of organizations from both ends of the political spectrum have been working towards reforming the state's criminal justice system. Governor Edwards made prison reform part of his gubernatorial campaign, and this legislative session, he is pushing forward a comprehensive overhaul of how we address offenders. Tonight, we'll look at those proposals and discuss the best ways for reforming criminal justice. Last week, Governor Edwards celebrated a significant victory in what has been overall a disappointing legislative session for him. Gathered with lawmakers and state prosecutors, he announced an agreement on major parts of his criminal justice reform package.
This compromise package contains smart, aggressive reforms that will certainly improve public safety, hold people accountable for criminal behavior, and reduce our state prison population by at least 10% over the next decade.
The governor's proposals are based on over 20 recommendations made by the Justice Reinvestment Task Force. The task force studied the issue for over a year and received support from a broad coalition of organizations.
In my 7 or 8 years in working in the criminal justice policy arena, I've never seen such bipartisan support and call for reform from the left to the right to the moderate side.
Natalie Laborde is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Policy and Research for the Department of Corrections. She says while the state's inmate population has dropped over the last 5 years to 37,000 inmates, it has reached a plateau.
The research shows that if no changes are made, that reduction would level off. So that's really what this package is about more than anything. It's identifying those drivers that helped reduce the population and reinvesting more dollars into those programs that we have seen work.
One of those drivers is the rate at which Louisiana jails nonviolent offenders. According to the Reinvestment Task Force, Louisiana sends people to prison for nonviolent offenses at 1.5 to 3 times the rate of southern states with similar crime rates. The top 10 crimes sending people to prison in 2015 were all nonviolent offenses, with drug possession topping the list.
In comparison to the national average, we certainly incarcerate more people for nonviolent offenses, and they also have significantly longer sentences. And that was part of the original plan with the felony class system to synthesize and to standardize those offenses, the penalties for those offenses.
The felony class system proposal would have taken Louisiana's more than 600 individual felony crime penalties and reduced them into 7 classes. After a compromise with state prosecutors, the proposal will now be studied by a task force with recommendations due by 2018.
If it's a good idea, I think this task force made up of practitioners, people who actually go into court and use the criminal justice system, the sentencing laws. I think this task force will recognize that and make a recommendation to do that. If it's not a good idea, I expect that they'll come back and recommend that we not do that.
Pete Adams is executive director of the Louisiana District Attorneys Association. He says Louisiana's incarceration problem is not its sentencing structure, but issues with rehabilitation and recidivism. He also feels that the nonviolent offender data used by the Reinvestment Task Force can be misleading.
Maybe it's a sexual assault victim that doesn't want to go to court and testify. They're afraid. If we can put that same person away for a distribution of cocaine and put him away for 20 years or 25 years, sometimes the victims say, I'd much rather you do that. That way I don't have to live with this. I don't have to to go public with this. And guess what happens? That person is in Angola as a nonviolent offender. So those labels don't always adequately describe the offenders.
The compromise legislation does include several sentencing reform measures, such as eliminating some mandatory minimums, bringing state laws for drug and property crimes in line with other states, reducing habitual offender penalties, and eliminating life sentences for repeat nonviolent crimes. To bring state prosecutors on board, Governor Edwards also dropped a proposal to allow the possibility of parole for geriatric prisoners. Older prisoners are among the state's most expensive due to health costs. Only Louisiana and Mississippi mandate life without parole for second-degree murder.
I'm a crime survivor. My son and future daughter-in-law was killed by a former jealous boyfriend. But I don't believe that we should base laws on the way we feel at the worst moment of our lives.
Norris Henderson is executive director of Voice of the Experienced, which works with former inmates and their families. He says research shows that older inmates pose substantially less risk of recidivism than younger prisoners and deserve a shot at pleading their case.
And that's all this whole package is about creating these opportunities for folks to come and present themselves and say, hey, how you like me now? Look what I've done lately.
It's estimated the compromise legislation will save $262 million over the next decade. 70% of that, $184 million, will be invested into expanding prison alternatives at the front end, like drug courts, and rehabilitative and reentry services at the back end. Of the 17,000 inmates released annually, 13,000 come from local prisons.
The ones that are going back to their communities pretty quickly are at the local level, which is why it's so important that we reach them with the reentry programming, the educational, the rehabilitative services that they need to get back and be productive members of society. So that's absolutely a priority of their reinvestment.
Television journalist Bill Moyers studied the prison system for his documentary, Rikers, An American Jail. In a recent interview with LPB, he suggests the best reform for the entire country's criminal justice system may be a return to its roots.
We can release a third of the prisoners in American prisons and jails who are there for lesser offenses without any threat to public safety. Why not do that? Why not really turn our penitentiaries to their original purpose, to help the penitent become rehabilitated and return to society as useful citizens?
Joining us to explore criminal justice reform is our studio audience. It includes 2 former inmates, parole and probation officers, district attorneys, a former federal magistrate and state judge, a criminal defense attorney, ACLU representative, and a member of an organization helping release citizens with their reentry into their communities. A statewide survey conducted earlier this year by the LSU Riley Center for Media and Public Affairs polled over 1,000 Louisiana residents on their opinion on criminal justice reform. Among the results, when asked about the current fairness of the state's criminal justice system, just over half of respondents, 51%, disagree with the statement that Louisiana's criminal justice system is fair. 34% agree. When the responses are broken down by race, a large majority of blacks disagree, 71%. Whites are split almost evenly, 41% disagree, and 44% agree. Asked their opinion of 3 criminal justice reform proposals, 75% of those surveyed favor shorter sentences for people convicted of nonviolent crimes. 86% of respondents support prison alternatives such as drug rehab programs for nonviolent offenders, and 72% favor ending mandatory minimum sentencing and allowing judges more flexibility in determining punishment. But support for shorter sentences for people convicted of nonviolent crimes drops when specific offenses are mentioned. 69% of respondents support lighter sentences if the crime is fraud or using illegal drugs. Support drops to 54% when those surveyed were asked for their support for lighter sentences for offenses such as burglary or selling illegal drugs. So let's start with your opinion of the state's criminal justice system. What's working and where is there room for improvement? Who would like to start, throw out the first opinion here?
Well, one thing that I think is working is the drug courts as an excellent alternative to incarceration. I was invited to a drug court graduation the other day by Judge Jules Edwards, and all of the graduates get a chance to speak and kind of tell their story. And it was really moving. I would encourage the public to find out when a drug court graduation is going on near you, and just go. It doesn't take long. It takes about a half hour. And I was really moved by the stories of these people who considered Judge Edwards their enemy originally, but who came to see him as their friend by the time they graduated.
Rhett, you were shaking your head.
Well, I agree. I mean, in my role in the Department of Corrections, in charge of reentry initiatives, one of our premier programs is our Steve Hoyle substance abuse treatment program, and we receive a lot of people who are participants in the drug courts to help them get treatment. Those who can't do well with outpatient treatment, and so we work very well with the drug courts. And we also have a really good reentry court program, which is currently doesn't receive any additional funding, and is just additional roles that we take on in the prison system as well as in the court systems. And it's been wildly successful to the extent we have. I agree with him that rehabilitation definitely works. We see it, the proof's in the pudding.
Norris, you were in the piece talking about this.
I think one of the things, well, a lot of the focus is on the nonviolent offender. And I think one of the things, if we look at the recidivism rates, is these are the folks who are kind of like we're actually having those problems with. And one of the things is that when we looked at this criminal justice package, that way it could have kind of like loosened up a little bit for those geriatric prisoners, and because the stats prove that folks who, especially second-degree murderers, that the recidivism rate is 0. You know, for long term, it's folks who felt the brunt of incarceration, that they seldom, if ever, recidivate. It's most of the folks who come out and don't really have, because we're looking at the population. I think one of the things we saw from the video, and Natalie mentioned that most of the folks are being released, they're being released from jails. They're not being released from corrections, so they're not coming out with the same skill sets that somebody coming out of a DCI, out of Angola, out of Hunts would have. And so that's where the real challenge is, that folks are being released. They're being released from places that don't provide no programmatic opportunities for them.
Well, what about the geriatric patients? That's an aspect of the bill that's no longer viable, at least this session. Is that a good thing or a bad thing from some of the prosecutors or judges' standpoint?
Part of the thing with geriatric, we all understand that the cost for having older inmates is very high, but you have to weigh that against some of the people who are in there that we've told the victims they're going to be doing life. This person who took your loved one's life is going to be doing life, and then to come back later and go to that victim and say, I'm so sorry, but he's going to be getting out and he's going to be coming back to your community, that's a hard thing to do.
I think we have to wonder as a society why we've changed how we view sentencing. I know 30, 40 years ago, the number of people that we sentenced to life without parole was much less than the number that we sentence today. The rates have changed. So I guess I understand that perspective, but my concern is that we have become a state, and we're not the only state that does this, but we've become a state that is increasingly wanting to sentence people to longer sentences, to sentence violent crimes to sentences that are much longer than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so this geriatric, the problem that we're going to have is going to get worse, if not better, without a change.
Mildred, do judges need more discretion on these mandatory minimums of a bad way to go?
And just to remind the audience, I was on the federal bench as a U.S. magistrate judge for 28 years and then served 6 months on the state bench. The one thing you cannot do as a federal magistrate judge is sentence felony cases. So that's not the place that I'm coming from mainly. What I saw sitting on the state bench is that things are not working. People say the criminal system in Louisiana is broken, but in fact, as I'm trying to make sense of what I'm seeing and talking to different people and researching things, what the conclusion I came to is that there is a very potent driver of Louisiana's incarceration rate, and that is a profit incentive that's there. And that is what disturbs me more than anything, is that we have a private prison system but also many sheriff's jails that are built on the private model. There's a profit incentive there. Every person that I sentenced as a state judge that was convicted had to pay some very high court costs and assessments. A piece of that went to the judges, to the DAs, to the public defenders, to the State Wildlife Fund. We have an offender-funded justice system in Louisiana that we are addicted. I basically say to people, we're invested in crime in Louisiana. When we achieve this, if we achieve this 10% reduction that is promised by the Justice Reinvestment Task Force, or the bills that are coming out of that, they're aiming to reduce our incarceration rate by 10% in 10 years. We're still going to be at the top of the world. We're going to still be 13 times Germany's rate. We're going to still be 3.5 times Iran's rate and 17 times Denmark and Syria's rate. So when people say the system is broken, it's not. It's intended to do what it's doing, which is to achieve profit for many people that are invested in the system.
Can I pick up what she says? I work for the American Civil Liberties Union in 8 southern states addressing these issues. You're right that even with a 10% decline, we're still going to be way ahead of the rest of the pack. Meanwhile, number 2, Oklahoma just passed legislation that's going to drive them down. Mississippi passed legislation that's going to reduce their population by about 16 to 20%. Alabama's done it. Georgia just has done it. Alabama just last Friday passed legislation providing for a pathway out for geriatric and seriously ill inmates. What's wrong with Louisiana?
Anybody want to answer the question, what's wrong with Louisiana? Carrie?
Well, I was the editor of the Anglo magazine for 16 years. And this may sound a little strange, but I can agree with Mr. Adams on one issue. Not everyone convicted of a nonviolent crime is necessarily nonviolent, but the converse of that is also true. Not everyone convicted of a violent crime has a violent criminal mentality or a criminal mentality. And using those terms, nonviolent criminal, violent criminal, is part of the reason, because that's political. And when you start throwing those around and you take discretion from judges and you make mandatory sentencing. Second-degree murder in Louisiana is a mandatory life without parole sentence. If you're a first offender, if you were someone's next door neighbor and you got in an argument on the tree on the property line and something or a career criminal, it's the same sentence and there's no discretion in either one of them. So yes, the converse of what he said is true. Not everyone convicted of a violent crime, even a serious violent crime, is a violent criminal, and that person, without any flexibility in the system, becomes one more cost, especially when the risk isn't there, and it just adds up. In 1980, we had 700 life sentence prisoners in Louisiana. Now we have 4,900. It's not working.
Yeah. Chica?
In 1983, I did a terrible thing. I had an aggravated kidnapping and attempt crime against nature on drugs and everything, but the day that I got to Angola, December the 27th, 1984, 11/17, 11/18, I was rehabilitated because I knew that wasn't the place I wanted to be. So I did everything that I had to do to earn my way out. And that's the only thing that we're looking at with the Pew and the people that came in. It's amazing that the data that they showed, the pushback came from the sheriffs and the DAs, the people that's in the business. It's the nonviolent short-termers that keep the revolving door going. What can an 84-year-old man with one leg, half blind, what can he do? I understand the victims. I was a victim of a crime. I mean, my son got killed, but I'm not bitter on everybody, to hang him and leave him alone. Because if you think back with prisons, with penitentiary, it started with the Quakers. Penance, rehabilitation, people being better people. And I dare to say, any audience, anybody sitting here today has done something that God has forgiven them for. So we may get to that point there. Maybe we can need God to come down here and get us all straight.
Well, that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. When we return, we'll be joined by a panel of experts to further explore reforming criminal justice in Louisiana. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing criminal justice reform in Louisiana. Joining us now is our panel of experts. Secretary James LeBlanc has worked for the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections for more than 40 years. He believes that vocational, educational, and life skills training for offenders is one of the keys to ensuring public safety upon reentry. Alana Odoms-Hebert serves as Deputy General Counsel of the Louisiana Supreme Court. She is also staff counsel to the Justice Reinvestment Task Force, whose recommendations were the backbone of the governor's criminal justice reform package. Bo Dewey is the district attorney for the 16th Judicial District, which covers St. Martin, Iberia, and St. Mary parishes. He's a graduate of Tulane and a former prosecutor. He was elected as district attorney in 2015. And Elaine Ellerby is the state director for Right on Crime, a conservative criminal justice reform initiative. Her development of reentry programs for offenders and their families has been recognized statewide and nationally. Before we go to our audience questions, I'd like to first ask every one of you, very briefly, how you would grade Louisiana's current criminal justice system. So let's start on the end here with Secretary LeBlanc.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, LPB, for doing this. We appreciate the opportunity to help the public understand what we're trying to accomplish. You know, if you just use the highest incarceration rate in the world, I guess you would give us an F. But as I reflect back on the last several years, and starting with the Sentencing Commission, where we had a DA as a chairperson, and we had DAs represented, judges represented, public defenders represented, and we had a wide variety of people on the Sentencing Commission, where we passed probably 30 pieces, more than 30 pieces of legislation that helped us move in the right direction. And in addition to that, when you look at what we've done at the local level, and that was talked a little bit about earlier, about the problems at the local level and discharging from our parish jails, we've accomplished quite a bit since in the last 3 or 4 years. And what we've done is we have 9 reentry centers, we have 4 day reporting centers, we have 250 certified treatment programs now at the local level, which we had 0 not that long ago. And as Rhett mentioned earlier, we have a bona fide treatment program in Bossier Parish with 600 beds. We have the Louisiana Transitional Center for Women in Madison Parish. Again, these are partnerships with the local sheriffs. And so I know I hear the issue of it's a money driver and economics at the local level, but everybody's working together trying to do the right thing, and our prison population is down by almost 5,000 inmates, and we rank somewhere around 2nd or 3rd in the country for prison reduction. You know, from that standpoint, I think we're making some progress, Bob, but we have a long ways to go.
So you modify your grade a little bit?
Yeah, I did. I brought it up from probably an F to maybe a D.
Ms. Hebert?
I'd probably have to echo the sentiments of Secretary LeBlanc. Some of my favorite teachers in school gave additional credit for class participation and for homework. And so I'll say our homework, we've done quite a bit of homework, as the Secretary just spoke about, and for the last 10 months, if not longer, about a year, we've done a tremendous amount as a state to learn and take a hard look at what the drivers of incarceration are. Now the task for us is to look into the mirror and be honest with ourselves and to address those things. And I think we, with this package, are doing many of those things, but we still have much more work left to do. And so I'd say that for class participation, we get an A. We are working hard, but faith without works is dead. And so what we've got to do is we've got to go into looking into some of our longest serving senators. We've got to look at why we're such a punitive society across the nation, but obviously in Louisiana with leading incarceration rates. We've got to look at why we are one of a few states who has still not fashioned a remedy for children serving life in prison without parole. That's a very serious issue. And if we don't do that, I think we will still fail. And I think we can do it. I know we can do it. We've all worked together. So many of the folks in this room have become friends, really close friends, doing this work together. And I'm hopeful. So I guess I'll say I hope that Louisiana becomes the poster child for best or most improved student for what we're trying to do together.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Dewey?
Well, I guess I would have to assess a grade similar to my panelist in that you know, as far as being the highest incarceration rate, we're not doing a very good job, and that's obvious. So what we need to do is we need to balance change in what we do and work together like we have been doing, and having a balance in there where DAs are concerned is a public safety issue, commitment to victims that we have made in the past, And to balance those interests and commitments and turn around and look at ourselves, like Elena said, in the mirror and make a decision as to what we're going to do. And I think we've done that. As far as class participation, as far as the stakeholders that are here, we come from a variety of different areas, yet we're going to sit and work together, and I think that's a great step we're taking. I mean, right now in the current proposal, we're going to see the benefit of 87% of the savings originally predicted, and I'm confident now that the reinvestment component is really going to be there to really implement those programs that are necessary and statewide. Because we do have some great programs that the Secretary mentioned that are making a difference. So overall, I think I would give us a medium C grade once you take the A's and the F and put it together, that we're really working towards the future of Louisiana, recognizing there's a problem, and I'm confident we're going to make some meaningful change.
Okay, thanks. Celebi?
Yes. Well, you know, one of the things for me is that for over 25 years I've worked in the trenches directly with the incarcerated population. In fact, Secretary LeBlanc was my boss one time. But what I'm seeing now is this wonderful opportunity for us to quit operating in these small silos. You know, someone brought up about the fact about the original intent for state penitentiaries. Well, you know, the whole purpose of that was to keep the bad guys away from the good guys. And even where we are right now, corrections many times is asked to do so many things that they were never intended to do. Now, will they not need to step forward and be the leader in some of these reforms? Yes, they will. And I think we have a team in place that recognizes that and is doing that. But we have to also realize that there are so many little parts and pieces that impact this. You know, many times when I hear the statement that, you know, corrections is about money driven and that it's about making a profit. You know, I work, for the last 3 years, I've worked directly with a local detention center. And one of the problems that they have as a local detention center is they have to rely on their police jury to do their part. Well, many times the police juries are coming back and saying, listen, we don't have money to keep your lights on in your jail. Well, so then what is the sheriff supposed to do? But we've also, all of the system has had a part in building what we have. But for the first time in the 25 years I've been working for the system, I'm seeing people coming together that have never come together, and that's exactly what everyone has said here. But like Alana said, I mean, we are probably the worst in the class right now, but we have so much potential because of the justice reinvestment, because of the conversations that are going on, to wind up being the most improved when it's all said and done.
Okay, thank you so much for all that. And now let's turn to our audience here and go to questions. Bobby, we're going to go to you first.
So, Bobby O'Dney, I'm an assistant DA in Lafayette. One of the issues that people talk about is the incarceration rate, and by the Pew Zone numbers, or the Justice Reinvestment Task Force numbers, 60% of the people incarcerated were put on probation for the crime for which they were ultimately incarcerated. So obviously something's not working properly in the probation department. And I would dare say a lot of it has to do with drug crimes and drug offenses, because top 5 drivers are drug offenses. And my understanding has always been there needs to be a carrot and a stick to sort of get over or get rehabilitation and deal with the addiction problem. And so as part of justice reinvestment, we're drastically reducing some of the sentences for possession with intent, and distribution of controlled dangerous substances. And one of the concerns that I have is that it's going to be all carrot and no consequences for not fulfilling your obligations in drug court. How do we address that?
Oh, Bobby, I'd like to jump in here and say that I think one of the things that we've realized with regard to drug crimes is that there was a war that was waged on drug crimes back in the 80s that we've seen the discourse now demonstrate that was created based upon policy decisions and not based upon the best way to address drug addiction and we've seen through many other countries that have addressed this problem, Portugal, other European countries that have really were going through the same kinds of addiction issues that we were back in the 80s and 90s, and decided to address the problem through their health systems as opposed to through their prison systems, and they were able to achieve great benefit to their societies by doing that, understanding that addiction is driven by an inability to work to deal with a health issue and not criminality. And so, to speak to the community supervision piece that you were mentioning, what the research suggests is that swift, certain, and proportional sanctions are what should be the way we deal with community supervision, meaning we don't have penalties that are arbitrary or attenuated or disproportionate to the violation. So looking at each violation, establishing a grid for certain types of violations, and making sure that the punishments that are given happen immediately, are consistent for everybody who's on probation, not disparate based upon who presents, what demographic you are, what have you, and also making sure that they're proportional. And so we're not looking at revoking people for minor violations, technical violations. We're looking to perhaps address things with shorter prison sentences, looking at administrative sanctions, looking at 402 sanctions. The model out of Hawaii with Judge Steve Alm, the HOPE probation program, really does talk about this carrot and stick. And so the carrot obviously would be folks are able to lessen their probationary supervisory period of time for good behavior, for doing the kinds of things that we want to see them doing, for getting a GED, for working, for doing the kinds of pro-social activities that we want to see people engaged in. That would earn them time off their sentence. But by the same token, failing to adhere, failing to work the program would result in prison time. Usually it's just much shorter. Recognizing that national campaigns on this exact issue suggest that even 3 days out of a community has the ability to disrupt someone significantly from their work, their community, their family, their children, the kinds of pro-social things we want to encourage. And so I think by reducing caseloads, by getting folks off of community supervision who are working well or doing well, that allows our probation and parole officers to be able to focus their attention more strategically on folks who are higher risk and more likely to reoffend.
Pete, you do probation and parole at the Department of Corrections. Maybe we can come to you for the next question.
First off, I always want to be a panelist on that question because I think we need a carrot and a stick. And she's right. You got to slap that kid's hand the minute he reaches in the cookie jar because they got to know what they're getting punished for. But you also got to reward them when they do well. And that's the main thing probation pro's trying to refocus on. Our job is public safety. We need to put the people behind bars that belong behind bars. But our successes is getting the resources, and hopefully they will reinvest all of this money back into the communities, into probation pro, into drug treatment, big time into mental health treatment, especially in your rural parishes that have nothing for us to give. And that's the whole key. If we get that reinvestment where we can get the people that we work with to trust us. Come to me, Pete, hey, I had a bad weekend, I smoked some dope. All right, I'm going to slap your hand and put you in jail for a day, but then I'm going to get you some treatment because I want you to change and become a successful tax-paying citizen. Because once one does that, that stops the whole tree. The family tree stops, generation from generation is saved. And we see it all the time. Chico, you're a great success story. You were talking to us earlier. That's what should make probation and parole officer feel good. Now, we should also take that person off the street that we can't change, or that person that's influencing others to do wrong, like our gang members. Those we need to take off the street, but the rest we need to get them help.
And Bob, if I may just add a little bit to that, one of the things, and it really relates to this, is the jail issue. In that 13,000 out of 17,000, I think that was mentioned maybe in the front end of this, are discharging out of our local jails. And give you an example in East Baton Rouge, when you get sentenced hard time, DOC time in East Baton Rouge, they contract with Catahoula to house them in Catahoula, so there's a van waiting for them at the courthouse to bring them to Catahoula. No reception center, straight to Catahoula, maybe do 2 or 3 years, and they discharge back to poverty. And that's That is one of our major objectives here, is we've got to stop that. We have got to, and these reentry centers I mentioned earlier is what's doing that. Act 389 I think is doing a decent job. We had testimony today in Jude B from 2 offenders that are going through our day reporting centers with drug problems, and now they don't. They're successful. They own their own company. They're doing great. So we have the material to know that it works, and that's what and as somebody said, you got those that you can't break, but the majority of the people that want to do right are going to take advantage of it. There's no question.
So what Pete was saying earlier about the money being used to plow back the money into the right programs, Mr. Dewey, you were talking about that earlier before we started about do you have confidence that money is going to be the savings are going to be used properly?
I'm confident it will. We've had a prior experience when we redid the juvenile justice system and adopted the Missouri model, and there was a promise that the money saved was going to be reinvested. And it wasn't all reinvested, and so we have a big juvenile problem. We have facilities that are unmanned and no staff in there because there's no funding, and so you're forced to reserve that space that may be necessary for a juvenile is for the really, really bad ones, whereas you can have some other centers that could kind of curb that behavior. And once again, as a youthful offender, you're hoping to curb that behavior before they graduate on to adult court, and then they become more repetitive, and it's very, very difficult to change that behavior, and the cycle just continues, like you said, Pete. I mean, you want to break that cycle. So I am confident that they're going to reinvest, and like I mentioned, the fact that they added another 20% to the dedicated juvenile justice is a big indicator that they're committed as a legislature.
Okay, good. We'll go to Robin now for a question.
Mr. Dewey, as a district attorney, you're a member of one of the 2 major groups that opposed the reform legislation recently. Sheriffs obviously have an issue with the stranded asset of jails they built in anticipation of continued prisoners. But the district attorneys also opposed it. I was wondering, what is the reason? The only thing that occurred to me is that by having less punitive sentencing and not having the threat that then allows them to plea bargain, that makes your job harder. Could you address why it is the DAs?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, the question was, why did we oppose? The reality is we didn't oppose the majority of justice reinvestment as it relates to nonviolent, non-sex offenders. In fact, we are supporting it, and we're agreeing to many, many recommendations. As an example, good time parole release at 25%. That used to be eliminated on the 3rd nonviolent offense. There was no good time parole. We've agreed to have that applicable throughout any nonviolent offense. So, as well as the probation changes that reduce, Elena was saying, that reduce the time on probation, and we agreeing with incentivizing good behavior. What happened is during the process is, you got to remember, the original resolution that created the Justice Reinforcement Task Force had 3 goals. And one of those goals was to save the prison space for violent and serious offenders. That tells me, as a member of the task force, let's concentrate on nonviolent, non-serious offenders, and let's deal with those who make up the majority of the people that are in the prison system, and let's see how we do with them, and let's see how we can implement programs to curb, that incarceration rate. So that's one of the reasons, is the mandates of the resolution said to deal with nonviolent, non-serious offenders, which is what we did. Second of all, there's many violent offenders that are out there that have been convicted, or we entered into plea agreements with them, with some counsel with the victims and or the victim's family about what they were going to do or not do as far as the sentencing. And some of those involved mandatory life sentences on, say, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, ag rapes. If there was a case that I handled, because I handled felony cases, homicide cases throughout my career, and if I felt personally that I did not think, while the facts may have justified a conviction for second-degree murder, but I thought life in prison for the rest of life was improper based on these facts, then we would always try to negotiate something down into a manslaughter or a negligent homicide, depending on the facts. So they did have that opportunities, and I think that's gotten lost, is the district attorneys, as they handle their cases, and we all know that. You know, we enter in plea agreements that deal with the charges, so the opportunity is there. And then let's not forget, at the end of the day, you got commutations. Any person who's serving life in prison after 15 years can apply for commutation of sentence. And that's regularly done. And then that does have a release valve for somebody to get that based upon their individual circumstances.
What percentage of these people are getting out, getting their sentences commuted?
I don't know the exact percentage. Maybe Secretary LeBlanc will tell us. I do know that.
I think Norris might be able to tell us probably a little bit better.
I do know that it's being used on a more regular basis now.
Okay. In the last 25 years, maybe 100 people have got their sentence commuted. And the vast majority of them has been under Governor John Bell's Edwards watch. Mike Foster may have done 2 or 3. Bobby Jindal didn't do but 1. That was actually incarcerated. The other 72 he did, people were already in society. Buddy Roma didn't do any. And so over the last quarter of a century, when we're talking about this process, it doesn't work. Prior to that 15 years Mr. Dewey talking about, people serving a life sentence had to just do 2 years and make an application for clemency. Some of them would get recommendations, never got them signed, and then some of them would actually get released. That changed because the DA's Association went and said, one crime survivor came and said, I'm tired of coming to these hearings. And what happened from that was they shifted to 15 years for anybody serving life. If you didn't get a recommendation, you had to wait 5 more years before you can reapply. And I will always say, well, if my brother became governor, I could never apply for a pardon. That's the reality of it. And just to circle back, because I always hear the DA say, we made a promise to the victims. Well, prior to 1979, just like the gentleman said, lifers had parole eligibility. 10-6 lifers in 1973, the first bifurcated punishment in this state in 1973. Second-degree murder was created. They never had a second-degree murder statute. It gave parole eligibility after 20 years. 1975, because of a decision of the United States Supreme Court that abolished the death penalty, they moved that to 40 years. That stayed in place from the late 60s all the way up until 1979. So when people say that we made a promise to victims that this is what the punishment was going to be, the statutes in this state made a promise to those persons who were serving their time that if you went in, done what you're supposed to do, we will review you at these intervals. And they never did that. We have 10-6 lifers who've been there over 50 years, 20-year lifers who've already done 40 years, and the first 40-year lifer became eligible for relief in 2015. So when we say this, let's get the history. We're going to tell the story. Let's at least have the story complete to the extent that when we say clemency is one of the hardest things in the world to get.
Okay, let's. You want to?
Well, I'd make a point is that, and Secretary LeBlanc knows, in this package, those lifers that had parole eligibility when they were convicted are going to be eligible for parole.
After 40 years.
Right, which was the sentence that was imposed in the sentencing structure when they were convicted.
Some were 20, but I think that's what.
Because some of them are 20-year lives who've already done 20 years more than they were supposed to do.
But most of them will be eligible because it is going to be about 40 years. It's, I think, 2 years short of 40 at the years that since early 70s.
Chico?
I'd like to say this. Eligible just means, and I think that's what the public and the DAs and everybody get confused. Being eligible for parole just means that you're eligible for a loan to get your house, but you have to do some things to do it. So if eligible, all these guys that's going to become eligible in the package, when they get to the pardon board, then the DA retry them again. That's just unfair. Because what happens at the pardon, at the clemency is mercy. So I've done everything I'm supposed to do, but then the victim gets this 3 things that you can never change. Victim opposition, law enforcement opposition, and the nature of my offense. I can never change that.
Do the DA, do the victims have too much influence in this process?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They did nothing wrong.
You know,
they did nothing wrong. and they're able, this process is the process that should be in place. The victim should have a right, or the victim's family, to go in if a loved one was murdered.
No, I'm
as well
saying,
as
do they
law
have
enforcement.
too much influence? Surely they have influence, but is their influence
The parole board, the parole board right now, the parole board for someone to get parole right now is not a majority. That was changed back a couple years ago. It used to be a unanimous verdict. That has changed with no opposition from the DA's association.
And we do victim offender dialogue. We need to do a better job at that and getting victims involved on the front end, because there's a lot of good things that come out of that when we get the victim and the offender together, voluntarily. But that has always been, that's a successful program. I met with a young lady out in New York who works for the Innocence Project this week, and that's some of the things that she talked about, that getting the victims involved early on is a real key here if we're going to have success with our LIFO population. And forgiveness means a lot, people, the victims at some point have to forgive, I believe, and I think if we work with them, and not every case, I'm not talking about every case, but we have 4,900 lifers, so there's a group out there, and I'm sure there's a group out there that can earn their way out.
Yeah.
I believe that.
I want to get to some more questions. Eva, you have a question?
First of all, I want to thank you so much for being here and to do all that you're doing. I think I'm the only educator here, and my question is this: how can we prevent all of this? What can I do as a mom, as a citizen, as a teacher, as a volunteer, to start the training that you talked about after you were incarcerated? What the judge said, and everybody, I listened to you carefully. What can you tell us as a system coming together at home, at school, the churches, the lawyers coming, YMCA, and you name it, to help our children?
Elaine, why don't you take
Okay,
that?
thank you. I appreciate that very much. Well, one of the things, my training is I have worked very directly and focused on incarcerated parents. And because of my background, I've really latched onto this fact that when children are not properly nurtured, then all kinds of things can happen. And so you say, what can be done? I've noticed that a lot of times when we're talking about early childhood programs, very rarely are the parents included in that equation. And that's really what's got to happen, because here's the fact is, we all parent like we were parented, right? How many people in here, when you found out you were having a baby, ran out and said, oh, let me go sign up for a parenting class? We don't do it. But the other thing right now is we have this wealth of information and research now available to us because of the technology about child brain development. And I will sit in my classes when I'm teaching reentry, and I can point out which person was not nurtured as a child. And a lot of times the reason that our programs are so effective is because we reach out to that individual and we give them that guidance that they never had. So, but for the question that you're asking, we really have got to engage parents in whatever way we can to be a part of their child's life, because many of them don't even know what to do or how to do. And if you start talking about drug addictions and mental health issues, well, then the children just kind of go out the window. And that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing second and third generation of children that have been thrown away, if not physically, emotionally.
Excuse me. To answer your question, that's a great question. And as an example, in the district, the 16th Judicial District, where I'm district attorney, the former DA had started a prosecutor's early intervention program, and the idea came from his wife, who was an elementary school teacher. She said, I can point to this person, and I'm going to tell you they're going to end up in the system if we don't do anything. And it's a partnership like we're talking about, where we identify at-need children through the educators. They're coming to school and they're hungry. They're not clothed properly. They're falling asleep. And so if the parent is not responding to the school, they engage the DA's office. We send a team out of professionals who go and do a risk and needs assessment at the home. They'll find out oftentimes you have a mother who is addicted to drugs and hadn't been home in weeks. And you got a 6th grader taking care of 2 younger siblings. That's a problem. So we get in and we identify the problem. We provide parenting skills, drug counseling, get the children some feeding programs, get them back up and running, and their grades shoot up. And this program was studied by the MacArthur Foundation and was recognized as a model program not only for the state of Louisiana but for the whole nation. But in getting it up, we were supported by the Office of Juvenile Justice and some funding mechanisms. And what's happened as the state budget gets cut, OJJ got cut, and now we're hanging on by a thread. But it's a program that has proven statistics and data that it does work. And that's one way I would suggest is exactly that. That money spent on the front end is so important that someone doesn't end up in the criminal justice system. That's where the money needs to be
And just to add real quick, Bob, and I want the investment side needs to come into play here. Those are the kind of things that we're going to be investing, partnership with our educators, with our business people, with our faith-based communities. Those are coming together, and where do we need to invest money? That's part of what this is about.
And I also want to echo, I think your question is the most central of this entire discussion, because unless we talk about how we prevent folks from ever committing crimes to begin with, I think we'll always be kind of in this circular kind of reasoning. And I think what we really need to think about, in my personal opinion, is that by being the most punitive with regard to our sentences and the way we treat our children, essentially what we're doing is we are treating most harshly children who are suffering from severe trauma. And I think folks who have been involved in the court system, and now with the advent of research around trauma-informed courtrooms, trauma-informed classrooms, what we really need to understand is we've taken children who've been exposed to violence and trauma and hurt and harm at a very early age, from the time they're 3, 4, 5 years old, and we've continued to shock them with that same kind of harsh treatment, and we've seen horrible results. And so we really need to realize and embrace a system that is obviously, which the system of juvenile justice should be rehabilitative, taking children who've been exposed to this kind of trauma and harm and really embracing trauma-informed teachings and trauma-informed ways of helping children cope with the kind of experiences that we know that they're dealing with, as the district attorney spoke about. And we cannot leave out how we deal with sentencing, because we can't feed them and clothe them and do all the things that we want to do up front, but then the first time they fall down and make a mistake, we ship them away for the rest of their life. Now, I am not speaking for the justices of the Supreme Court when I say what the comments that I have just made. I am speaking as myself, in my own person. I believe that is a key part of it. We have got to deal with children not as super predators, not as monsters, but as children and as the folks who will be leading us going forward in our lives. And so we've got to be better with how we treat our children.
So we're pretty much out of time, so I want to apologize to those of you that didn't get a chance to ask a question, but I want to give you all a chance just to make a very brief closing comment before we wrap up. Elaine, you want to start?
Well, I think the one thing that I would want to impart is the fact that as we've sat here today and talked about how there's so many different groups coming together to talk about this issue, that one of the key things that I'm finding, and believe me, I'm kind of a neophyte when it comes down to being down in the legislature and watching that process, citizens have to get involved. You know, we all are, we feel like this is a very important issue, and it is. It is impacting every aspect of our life here in our great state. And so citizens need to get involved. You need to go down and speak to your legislator. You need to let them know what you believe in, what you want to see happen. Because I've had some legislators come back and they've voted no, no, no all the way down the road on all these reforms, and their comment back to me is saying, well, because I don't want my constituents wouldn't like me doing that. And then we have the survey that came out that says, oh no, they do want to see you reform the system. So there's a disconnect, and so we as the people must go forward and speak to our legislators and let them know what we think and how we feel.
Okay, very briefly, Mr. Dewey?
Well, I would just end by saying that we do have a problem. Incarceration is definitely a problem, and I really appreciate, and I'm proud to say in this process that we've worked together and the different stakeholders in here. We put a lot of things aside and we're working. While we may have some differences on how to get there, I think we've got some legislation that could really make a difference, and time will tell, and I'm confident that it's going to make a difference, and then we can work off of that.
Thank you. Ms. Aber?
I'd like to say that I think each of us is better than the worst thing that we've ever done. A person who's committed a violent crime is not just a violent person. A person who's committed a theft is not just a thief. And a child who's made a mistake is not forever condemned. And so I know that the work that we've done together demonstrates that we can find common ground moving forward. This is not a zero-sum game. We have an opportunity together as a community to continue pushing forward, to continue moving forward, and to apply pressure to move forward in the ways that we know as a community will make us safer, will make us stronger, and will allow us to be more productive. And I believe we can do it.
Thank you. Secretary LeBlanc.
Well, when I look back on the last year and the experience I've had working with the group that we work with, the task force, I really would just want to thank the group, the task force, as chair of the task force, and what we accomplished. As I said at the press conference, it's kind of a dream come true for me, and after 40 years, that we are in a good spot today. And I would ask, that people talk to their legislators, tell them what's going on after this, after what you've listened to, however you feel. And I'd hope that you'd support a package that we have currently, and we still have a ways to go.
Okay, thank you all. So we've run out of time for our question and answer segment. We'd like to thank our panelists, Secretary LeBlanc, Ms. Odom-Zabert, District Attorney Dewey, and Ms. Ellerby, for their insight on this month's topic. We appreciate everything they've contributed to us tonight. When we come back, we'll have a few closing comments.
Bob, what a great conversation. It could go on for a long time, but we didn't touch on all the issues. People don't want to pass taxes for mental health clinics. Bail is still a problem, but I hope we continue the conversation online.
I hope so too. People do want change. They really do.
Yeah, and that's the encouraging part of this one. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/public square. While you're there, check out the task force recommendations as well as the LSU Criminal Justice Reform Survey. Please take the time to comment on tonight's show. We would love to hear from you.
Earlier this month, the U.S. Department of Justice announced its decision not to bring federal charges against 2 white police officers involved in the shooting death of Alton Sterling. Sterling's death last summer ignited a national debate on how law enforcement interacts with minority communities. Louisiana Public Square explored this issue in February on Black and the Blue. So join us for an encore presentation on Wednesday, June 28th. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.
Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.